The sun hadn't even fully cracked the morning sky when Ray pulled up his sturdy pickup truck in front of Rodriguez Auto Center. He sat there for a moment, staring through his windshield at the glassy front of the showroom, where bright lights already spilled over the polished floors and empty cars. On the passenger seat beside him was that familiar blue work shirt with Ray stitched over the pocket. As he picked it up, he reminded himself that for today he wasn't here as the new owner. Today, he was just another janitor, one of those regular folks who sweep floors and scrub bathrooms, usually with no one even bothering to look them in the eye. Slipping the shirt over his usual clothes, Ray felt the rough fabric press its routine against his skin. He took a deep breath, then got out and walked calmly around to the back entrance where the staff usually came in. The building was already humming quietly, a radio playing somewhere, the faint squeak of sneakers on tile. As he pushed the service, Dr. Open, he noticed how people glanced at him, then shifted their eyes away as if he were part of the furniture. Their nods were quick, guarded, not exactly rude, but certainly the kind of respect that came more from his badge than from his face. To them, Ray was just another blue-collar worker, and at that moment, that's exactly what he wanted. Walking through the maintenance hallway, Ray saw the small rituals of the early morning. Someone pouring cheap coffee, another folding cloths. For cleaning windows, the youngest mechanic texting on his phone before the day really started. No one knew his story, or that he had enough money to buy the business outright. To them, he was nothing but a new janitor, and that, he thought, was all right. No need for a grand entrance, not today. What mattered was seeing things without the filter of titles or expectations. Ray felt an odd calmness as he moved through the quiet building, half listening to a conversation about last night's Dodgers game. He could sense, even then, the odd tension in people's movements, the way they greeted him like he was invisible but not quite. He wondered how long it would take for anyone to realize that the man sweeping the floor today might soon have a say in their futures, though for now nobody really had a clue. The whirring of coffee machines filled the air, blending with the clinking of keys as workers started to trickle in for the early shift at Rodriguez Auto Center. Ray, pushing his supplies cart down the shiny corridor, tried to blend in, moving mop buckets, straightening trash cans, wiping a fingerprint off a door handle. He listened as groups gathered by the coffee machine, talking in low voices about schedules or the headache of last night's traffic on the 405. The atmosphere felt strangely charged, as if everyone was holding back, not just their laughter, but their real thoughts too. Every now and then, someone would give Ray a small nod or a half-hearted morning, but the greetings never lasted. Everyone seemed careful not to look at him too long, as if worrying that standing out meant trouble. Ray noticed these little things as he worked his way around the showroom. There was a kind of expectation hanging in the air that morning, a tension you could almost taste, even before the first customer showed up. It was in the way people hovered close to their stations, or how their conversations paused if a supervisor walked by. Most folks kept their voices low, never quite letting go even for a moment. There were no big laughs or loud greetings, just the low hum of everyone trying to stay in their lane. As invisible as he felt, Ray almost found comfort in it. The blue uniform let him move through every corner without anyone bothering to ask. His business, but it also put a wall between him and everyone else. It was the silent agreement of places like this. Uniforms meant you could be everywhere, but rarely did anyone actually see you. Ray understood it well. In a way, the invisible. Spaces were where the real heart of the place lived, and that was exactly what he had come for. If he wanted to know how things truly worked and who kept the gears turning, he would learn it by watching from the edges. Ray kept his pace slow, mopping the entrance just as the first rays of sunlight broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Bits of conversation drifted his way, a complaint about the new schedule, Quiet plans for lunch, worries about sales targets, all of it, snippets of the life beneath the polished surface. For now, that was enough. He could wait. The truths tucked away in the cracked tiles and hurried coffee breaks, those were what Ray had come to find. It was around 8 when Jessica, the general manager of Rodriguez Auto Center, made her entrance. She was never one to slip in quietly. With every step, her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, setting the tone for the rest of the staff. People seemed to stiffen up the instant she arrived. Office chatter went quiet. Even the mechanics in the back straightened their posture when they caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors. The usual "Good morning, Jessica" traveled across the showroom, almost like a warning bell, more a reminder to be careful than any real greeting of warmth. Jessica moved with the kind of command that made it clear she didn't tolerate nonsense. Her suits were always crisp and her hair tied back tightly, leaving no room for argument. She paused for a second to scan her territory, eyes moving over every desk, every shiny car on display, and every member of her staff. Any hint of a mess or a slouch, and she zeroed in like a hawk. The staff understood this routine well, and it kept everyone, from receptionist to top salesperson, on edge. When her gaze landed on Ray, standing next to his bucket near the front window, her expression hardened. She didn't see another colleague, just someone who didn't quite fit the perfect image she wanted for the dealership. Jessica didn't bother asking who he was or what exactly he was doing there. Instead, she barked out a sharp, "You're not supposed to be in this area. Move to the back and make sure the service bays are spotless." She made sure to say this loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice echoing through the open space. No one dared to defend the new janitor. A couple of salespeople exchanged quick glances. Someone shuffled behind a computer, and a cleaner in the corner suddenly found a smear on the glass to focus on. A silent lesson unfolded in the room. Jessica ruled through order, and everyone else knew their place. Ray gave a polite nod, keeping his face neutral, and quietly pushed his cleaning cart away, all while noting the ripple her presence created. This was not a place for relaxed banter or slips in discipline, at least not while Jessica was watching. For now, everything was back in its strict order, with everyone keenly aware of who really pulled the strings in this polished, anxious world. The awkwardness from Jessica's outburst swept through the dealership like a cold breeze, tumbling across the desks and settling in the spaces between people. For a moment, it felt as if time itself paused. Everyone at Rodriguez Auto Center acted suddenly quieter, hands hovering uncertainly over keyboards or brochures, eyes fixed anywhere but at Ray or Jessica. The clients who were browsing the trucks and sedans nearby looked over, sensing tension, then hurried away in search of a salesperson. No one in the room made a move to stick up for Ray. Challenging Jessica in front of everyone was simply not worth it. She had made it clear more than once that she didn't tolerate embarrassment. Not for herself, not for the business, and certainly not from a janitor, whether new or old. Ray kept his head down and responded to her demands with a calm, "Sure. The thing, ma'am," choosing his tone carefully so it sounded respectful and nothing more. He didn't look at her again as he turned his cart toward the back of the showroom. He walked slowly, giving himself a moment to pull in a steady breath and let the sting fade. The show had been meant for the audience, not for him personally. That much was obvious. But even knowing that, Ray felt a surprising weight pressing on his shoulders. The blue shirt on his back seemed a little heavier as he went. Inside, Ray made notes to himself. He already understood that the issue had nothing to do with a wet floor or how shining the showroom was. Moments like this were about showing who really had the power, putting people in their place where everyone could see. The battle wasn't over mops or dirty boot prints. No, what he watched was the theater of workplace hierarchy, where every public word was a reminder of who counted and who quietly faded into the background. Ray found it interesting in a detached way, how easily a simple job like cleaning could become a stage for something bigger. A person in a blue shirt became almost invisible, but still carried stories and feelings. Ray had seen these things before in other places, but here, for the first time, they hit close. The humiliation wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. It stuck with him long after he rolled his cart into the service bays, blending again into the world where names and titles seemed to matter more than the people behind them. As the day moved along, Ray picked up on a pattern that was impossible to miss. Jessica's sharp words didn't just land on him. They seemed to find anyone who didn't fall exactly in line with her expectations. Now and then, if someone laughed a little too loudly near the break room, or left a chair pushed away from their desk, Jessica would zero in with a quick look or a comment that cut through the comfortable rhythm of the place. Ray noticed how the pressure wasn't just about keeping floors shiny or papers stacked perfectly straight. The real message was always about fitting into her idea of what belonged, the kind of perfection that never left room for mistakes, much less for giving her any attitude. It became clear that people spent more time worrying about not messing up than they did connecting with each other. Everybody seemed to have their antennae up, picking up the slightest shifts in Jessica's mood, trying not to be noticed for the wrong reasons. Ray saw a young salesman, Tim, try to ease tension with a joke about weekend plans, only for Jessica to raise an eyebrow and remind him there was work to do. Another time, one of the office assistants, Maria, who always wore a bright scarf, was called out just for humming along to a song on the radio. The message was clear. If you wanted to stay on Jessica's good side, you kept your head down, did the job, and never stepped outside the lines she had drawn. Even so, Ray kept to his quiet routine, weaving between shining cars and glass cases full of awards and trophies. He wiped smudges and organized magazines, listening as conversations trailed off the moment Jessica walked by. The whole showroom started to feel like a stage, spotless, always bright, everyone acting their part. The customers who dropped in saw nothing but careful smiles and crisp uniforms. Underneath, the staff pressed their worries into silence, hoping not to attract the kind of attention that could ruin their day. It amazed Ray how easily things looked perfect, all while nerves ran high just beneath the surface. Sometimes the pressure would break through, a dropped tool, a forgotten greeting, and the mask of calm would nearly slip. But Jessica was always watching, delivering another reminder that, in her eyes, only perfect performances were welcome there. Around noon, when everyone was winding down for lunch, things took a sudden turn and tension shot up a notch. It happened quickly. A family walked in, laughing and talking, as a little girl with blonde braids skipped between her parents. She carried a juice box, bright orange against the pale tiles. One moment, she was looking at a shiny red sedan. The next, her juice slipped from her hand and splattered right near the front entrance, making a small, sticky puddle that spread surprisingly fast. Ray saw what happened from across the room, right as the girl's mother tried to reach her with napkins from her purse. Without missing a beat, Ray moved in, grabbed a towel from his cart and knelt to wipe up the juice before anyone could even react. He worked fast and quietly, careful not to make a bigger scene. The parents smiled at him with obvious relief, thanking Ray like he had just rescued their afternoon. Even some of the folks at the front desk exhaled. Crises like that could throw off the whole vibe if not handled quickly. But any sense of gratitude vanished as soon as Jessica caught sight of the scene. She appeared suddenly, heels clicking, double time, her face tight with frustration. Her voice rolled out across the lobby. You could hear it even at the far end of the row of cars. Instead of focusing on the accident or the grateful customers, she focused on Ray, giving him a harsh lecture right there in front of everyone. Next time, keep those kinds of messes away from where our clients can see, she snapped, not bothering to lower her voice. This is not the image we want to show when someone walks in the door. The parents shifted uncomfortably, and the little girl's cheer faded into a guilty shuffle behind her dad's leg. The front desk staff went silent again, hands still and faces turned away so as not to get pulled in. One of the sales guys, who had started to step forward, changed his mind, busying himself with a stack of brochures. People held their breath, bracing for another burst of criticism. Ray straightened up slowly, gave the parents a reassuring nod, and carried his bucket back toward the janitor's closet, feeling the weight of every silent stare in the room. Standing in full view of clients and workers, Ray became the focus of Jessica's anger, which grew louder and sharper with every sentence. She raised her voice not just to scold, but to turn Ray into an example for everyone else. Ignoring the looks of embarrassment and discomfort from the family whose child had dropped the juice, Jessica rattled off a list of complaints. "We cannot have this sort of thing where customers can see. It is sloppy, it is unprofessional, and it sets the wrong impression for anyone coming into Rodriguez Auto Center." Her words echoed, bouncing off the tile and glass, making a scene out of something that, just a minute before, had been handled quietly and kindly. The parents, obviously uneasy, tried to speak up. "Actually, your employee here was very helpful." But Jessica barely glanced in their direction. She was set on using this moment to underline her authority and keep everyone in line. Each word made it clear that the true point wasn't the spill, but the need to establish control and show everyone how quickly she could find weakness in the team. It left the room stiff and silent, the kind of quiet that makes you wonder if people are holding their breath. For a second, Ray almost slipped back into his usual habit, just nodding and moving away, letting it all slide off. But something in the way Jessica refused to acknowledge the humanity of the moment hit him differently this time. Instead of shrinking away or giving the usual apology, he looked straight at her and replied in a calm, steady voice, "With respect, I was just trying to help our guests feel comfortable. Nobody got hurt. The mess is gone." There was nothing confrontational in his tone. If anything, it was a simple statement of fact with an edge of quiet pride underneath. Jessica hesitated, caught off guard by the direct but polite reply from someone she had written off as invisible. The silence in the showroom stretched out heavier than before, and for a split second, nobody seemed sure how to react. A couple of co-workers glanced over, eyebrows raised, curious now in a way that felt new. That reply, and the way Ray stood his ground, made people question whether there was more to him than his mop and his blue shirt. Where before he was just another background worker, now something about his calm strength left everyone wondering if they'd been missing something important right there in plain sight. In the background, as the story of the encounter between Ray and Jessica started to make the rounds, the usual hum of the dealership changed. Employees moved a little slower and glanced around more than usual, their curiosity thinly disguised as they whispered in breaks or exchanged looks near the coffee machine. Tim, the young salesperson who had got in trouble earlier for telling a joke, managed a quick, supportive smile when he passed Ray in the hallway. Maria, who still wore her bright scarf, shot him a look that mixed nervousness with something like quiet encouragement. Even Joe and Melissa, usually glued to their desks and staying far away from drama, couldn't help but lift their heads when Ray rolled his cart by, their eyes following him a little longer than they would have yesterday. There was something different in the air, like the first sign of spring after a long winter. Even though nobody was brave enough to say it out loud, a part of the staff started to imagine that maybe things could change. Of course, the fear of Jessica finding out about any open rebellion was still real. People didn't want to risk their jobs or bring more trouble down on themselves. Still, every little sign of support, an extra nod, a door held open, a thanks man that was a tiny bit more genuine than normal, showed that Ray's quiet challenge had gotten under their skin Ray just kept doing his job, moving from the service area to the customer lounge, mopping up the last drops of juice before they got sticky on the tile. He felt every pair of eyes tracking his movements. The change in how people acted around him was subtle but clear. Where? They'd once seen only another worker in a blue shirt. Now they were paying closer attention to how Ray carried himself, how he spoke with a measured calm, how he refused to get flustered when things went sideways. If Jessica's strict rules were a kind of script everyone felt they had to follow, Ray had just delivered a new line nobody expected. Rumors filled the cracks of the place. Wonder, suspicion, even hope. Some employees were starting to wonder where Ray had worked before Rodriguez Auto Center, or if he was related to one of the owners, or if maybe he'd done something special before ending up here. Whatever it was, the idea was out there now. Ray's calm in the middle of a storm had changed the way the team saw him, and maybe themselves. During a short break in the employee lounge, small talk turned into something more as Tim, Maria, and Joe pulled up chairs near the back table. At first, their voices stuck to the usual topics: leasing numbers, the price of gas in Chicago lately, whether the coffee machine would ever get fixed. But as the place emptied out and the background noise softened, the conversation shifted and became almost a whisper. They leaned in, making sure Jessica wasn't nearby, their eyes flicking to the doorway every now and then. Tim broke the ice first. You all saw how Ray stood up to her, right? He wasn't disrespectful at all, just steady. It was like he was used to handling that kind of thing. Maria nodded, twirling the ends of her scarf, her eyes shining with a mixture of worry and admiration. He's different. He barely says a word, but you notice he's always paying attention, more like he's watching all of us than just the floors. And I've never seen him flustered, not once, even when the phones are ringing, off the hook or Jessica's in one of her moods. Joe, who usually kept quiet during these kinds of talks, finally chimed in. You think maybe he's with corporate, an undercover boss or something? He shrugged, smiling just a little at how wild it sounded, but there was genuine curiosity in his voice. I mean, think about it. Someone just shows up out of nowhere, doesn't act scared of anyone, and seems to always know what's really going on. Maria laughed, then caught herself, looking around in case anyone overheard. What if he's from headquarters? Sent to check if Rodriguez Auto Center is up to standards. I heard about places in New York and Los Angeles getting surprise audits. Tim, warming up to the idea, leaned forward. Or maybe he's the new owner, testing all of us before making changes. I read a story like that once. They all grinned, enjoying the unlikely theory for a minute. The more they spun it, the more sense it seemed to make, considering how odd things had felt since Ray arrived. Sure, it was probably just another rumor, but even so, it made everyone rethink everything they'd seen him do, every calm word, every moment he watched instead of spoke. The break didn't last long, but the new sense of possibility lingered, feeding the hope that maybe, just maybe, change was coming, and it might start with someone nobody expected. In the service bay, Ray caught bits and pieces of the buzz drifting from the break room. Someone mentioned undercover boss, while another voice brought up headquarters audit. Ray could tell that his choice not to say much only added fuel to their theories. But he gave no hints, just kept moving through, pushing his cart, making sure every part of the dealership looked tidy. He paid close attention, not just to the cars and the tools, but to the words exchanged in low tones when managers were out of sight. There was always a certain nervous energy once leadership left the room, and people would let their real thoughts slip out, their guard down for a few precious minutes. Ray took in more than just rumors. He could sense genuine concerns in the team, Their worries about job security, the frustration bubbling when their hard work went ignored, and a longing for a place where everyone felt respected. It became clear to him that these feelings had been building long before he arrived at Rodriguez Auto Center. The conversation in the lounge had not started because of him, but somehow his presence made it safer to voice things that usually stayed hidden. Meanwhile, Jessica pushed harder than ever. She stalked the halls with her clipboard, her instructions coming faster, her critiques sharper. If a service technician took too long fixing a tire or a receptionist failed to answer, on the second ring, Jessica was right there, making a pointed remark for everyone to hear. More than once, Ray overheard her dismiss employees' suggestions about workflow or customer service, brushing off input as if no one else's ideas could possibly measure up. The rules got stricter, breaks monitored carefully, shift changes double-checked, and any slip-ups were met with not just correction, but a warning that felt like a threat. This management style hung over the team like a heavy cloud. Out in the service area, people swapped grim looks or went silent whenever Jessica showed up. Creativity disappeared from the workspace. Nobody wanted to risk doing anything outside the norm. Even Tim and Maria, who usually brought a little energy and laughter, treaded carefully now, watching every word. With every extra rule and reprimand, the real atmosphere became less about teamwork and more about surviving the day without drawing attention. Ray could sense the tension thickening, but he kept his focus and stayed true to his own way. Quiet, watchful, and persistent, picking up not just trash, but the hidden truths shaping the place from the inside. Over the next few days, Ray stepped up his quiet observation. He kept doing his usual rounds, but now he was more alert than ever to the real mood at Rodriguez Auto Center. It did not take long for him to notice just how much fear shaped people's actions. Team members would barely speak up in meetings. No one volunteered for new projects, and even the smallest mistake seemed to feel like a threat. Whenever Jessica passed by, folks straightened up and kept their eyes down. Ray watched as conversations would dry up mid-sentence at just the sound of her shoes in the hallway. The nervous atmosphere reached everyone, including Ben, a mechanic with grey hair and grease under his nails who had worked at the dealership longer than almost anyone. When machines broke down or paperwork piled up, Ben always seemed to know how to get things back on track. Yet even he kept his advice to whispers, helping people quietly behind the scenes, rather than speaking up where Jessica could hear. One morning, Ray overheard Ben giving Tim pointers on how to process a tricky warranty claim without drawing too much attention. "Just sign here and take it to payroll yourself," Ben muttered, glancing over his shoulder first. It became clear to Ray that nobody felt safe suggesting improvements. There were no ideas for streamlining the sales process, no suggestions about changes. In the waiting area, not even small talk about better snacks in the break room. There was this constant shuffling, everyone making themselves as invisible as possible, hoping to get through the week without becoming a target. People did exactly what was asked and nothing more, afraid that showing initiative would only backfire. Ray thought about how this kind of climate was not just hard on morale, but also stifled basic teamwork. He saw that resilience here did not mean pushing for better, but instead meant quietly surviving, enduring another day, another shift, hoping not to be singled out. People had learned to keep their heads down rather than risk open disagreement, and even dreams of fresh starts or small changes had faded into background noise. Still, Ray kept listening and watching, taking in all these details. He was starting to understand the shape of things at Rodriguez Auto Center, and with every day, he wondered just how long folks could keep living and working like this without something finally changing. One afternoon, Ray found Ben out near the lot, fixing a rattling noise under the hood of a customer's sedan. The sun was out, and for a moment the service area felt just a little less tense than usual. While Ben checked the engine, Ray started helping with small things. Holding tools, passing rags, and picking up loose screws before they rolled away. It was the kind of simple teamwork that hardly ever got noticed by the folks running the place. As they worked quietly, Ray leaned in, lowering his voice just enough so only Ben could hear him in the steady buzz of traffic nearby. "Ben, it seems like you know all the ins and outs here. The place wouldn't run half as smooth without someone like you keeping it together behind the scenes." Ben looked at him, a bit startled, not used to being recognized for the hard parts of his job that went unseen. There was a flicker of gratitude behind his guarded look. "Most of the time nobody's looking," Ben replied with a half-smile. "But someone has to pick up the slack when things fall apart." Ray nodded, making it clear he was not just passing time with idle talk. Sometimes what keeps a place alive is never a line in the manual or a note from the manager. It is the unspoken effort. "I see that, I see you." The words hung between them, honest and direct. Ben glanced away, the corners of his mouth twitching just a bit, and for one instant the weight on his shoulders seemed lighter. That short exchange, barely longer than a couple minutes, stuck with Ben as he finished the repair. It was the first sign he had seen in a long time that someone might actually value the work nobody talks about. The smallest suggestion of support carried more hope than a paycheck ever could. Ben was tough, but even for him, the simple recognition from Ray awakened an idea that leadership did not always have to come from the top, and it certainly did not need to be loud to be respected. Ray walked back inside, feeling sure that under all the strict rules and quiet fears, there were people here ready for more. The seeds of change were present, but it would take the right signal and just a little trust for anything to truly grow. The morning of the big surprise at Rodriguez Auto Center started out feeling nothing like any other day. The worn-out tension that usually hung around the office and shop just was not there. Maria was humming as she straightened the stack of sales brochures, and Tim actually cracked a few jokes that landed. Even Joe, known for keeping to himself, handed out coffees with a big grin and a good morning that sounded genuine. Some folks said they had heard a visitor was coming from the main office downtown, maybe even someone from corporate. Jessica, for once, greeted everyone with a smile just a little wider than usual. It was as if the building got a breath of fresh air. Little by little, the mood lifted. Hushed optimism spread, and for a handful of hours people seemed to believe that good things might finally be rolling their way. That sense of relief, though, vanished the moment a line of shiny, dark cars rolled up to the front. The doors swung open in near-perfect sync, and everyone in the lobby stood just a bit straighter, nerves kicking up again. Jessica immediately brushed back her hair, smoothing her shirt, and the mechanics wiped their hands a little more than they needed to. All eyes landed on the man who stepped out of the first car, a tall guy in an expensive suit, someone nobody recognized. The anticipation in the air was heavy. There was still that quiet hope that a visit from headquarters meant change, maybe even progress. Just as people finished, whispering guesses about who the new arrival might be, the back door of another car swung open and Ray stepped out. The same Ray who everybody had known only as the steady, soft-spoken janitor, only this time he was dressed in a sharp suit, looking confident and totally at home beside the high-ranking visitor. You could hear people literally stop breathing for a moment. Maria's mouth hung open, and Tim nearly dropped the box of donuts he was holding. Even Ben walked in from the garage, tools clinking in his pocket, uncertain if he was seeing things. In those few seconds, every unspoken rule about who mattered in the dealership, about who called the shots, seemed to fall away. The old hierarchy. Workers on one side, management on the other, was instantly scrambled. People exchanged stunned glances. no one sure what would happen next, but it was clear that Ray, the man they had underestimated, was about to change everything. The truth settled over Rodriguez Auto Center like a thick blanket. Ray, the quiet janitor everyone thought they knew, was actually the new owner. For a few moments, nobody moved. Even the constant hum of the printers and the buzz from the service phone seemed to fade out. Jessica, caught off guard, tried her best to act as if nothing had changed. She grabbed her clipboard, started mentioning policies and rules, hoping to regain control. Her voice was steady, but her hands gave her away, tapping out an uneven rhythm against the counter. Ray didn't need to say much. Just his calm, sure stance in that suit swept away every doubt about who held authority now. He greeted the high-ranking visitor with an easy handshake and then turned toward the employees, the people who actually made the place run every single day. He looked around and caught the eyes of Tim, Maria, Ben, and even Joe. Most didn't know how to react. Shock showed on some faces, and a quiet hope flickered on others. For years, many of the staff had given their all, and rarely felt recognized. In that moment, many found themselves feeling not only surprised, but a little relieved too. Ray had seen them, really seen what they did, and now there was a chance that their efforts might finally count for something. It was as if a weight they never talked about had been lifted a bit, just enough to let them breathe easier. Jessica faced a new, uncomfortable reality. All the energy she had used to enforce rules and keep the staff in line suddenly seemed misplaced. She had made decisions and judgments based on surface impressions, never suspecting that the janitor might be the one evaluating her all along. Now, it was her leadership facing scrutiny. There was no way to mask her insecurity underneath all those procedures. Ray glanced around the showroom, offering a small but genuine smile. It was obvious that things were about to be different. The message was clear: no more people being overlooked, no more standing in shadows. The staff started to realize that this was not just another visit from management, but the start of something big. And finally, maybe their everyday struggles and talents would find the recognition they deserved. When Ray called a meeting later that day, everyone at Rodriguez Auto Center showed up. From the folks who swept the floors to the salespeople in pressed shirts, every team member gathered under the bright lights in the main showroom. There were no rows set aside for managers or reserved squishy chairs at the front. People just found a spot alongside whoever walked in next to them. For the first time in anyone's memory, it did not matter what job you did or what uniform you wore. There was a strange, electric feeling in the air. Some people looked nervous, eyes darting between Ray and their old managers, still not sure how the cards would fall. Others just looked plain exhausted, but you could catch a glimmer of hope if you watched them close enough. More than anything, there seemed to be this shared feeling that something important was finally happening, and that maybe, just maybe, it might be good for them. Ray stood up in front of them all, his face open and friendly, but serious in a way that made people sit up straighter. He started to talk, not as a distant boss, but as someone who had walked in their shoes, who had seen the place as they had, from the ground up. He told them what he had noticed while working in the background, the way tension hung over break rooms, the fear that kept people silent, the sad fact that folks would rather keep their heads down than risk being noticed. He spoke slowly, making sure his words landed. He talked about situations he had seen or heard about, employees humiliated over mistakes, ideas ignored before they were even finished, people doubting themselves because they had been made to feel invisible. There was no judging, just honest observation, as if he was finally giving voice to what everyone else had felt but never dared say out loud. For the first time, people glanced around and saw relief in each other's faces. They realized they did not have to carry all that shame or frustration alone. Ray's words were not just about blame, they were about acknowledgement. He made it clear that the silence was over, and that from now on, nobody needed to hide the truth about what went on at Rodriguez Auto Center. As Ray's words sank in, the employees exchanged uncertain glances. Some hugged their notepads to their chests, others tapped their feet or fidgeted with the edges of their uniforms. They were not used to hearing truth spoken so plainly, especially not by someone at the top. At one side of the room, Jessica, who had been the loudest voice of authority for so long, stepped forward. In her usual measured tone, she started listing the achievements made under her leadership: high sales numbers, speedy turnarounds, stellar reviews from a handful of demanding clients. She pointed to charts and recent bonuses, making it sound as if strict rules and a firm hand had always brought nothing but positive results to Rodriguez Auto Center. But as she spoke, her words seemed to lose their force. Ray listened, his attention never wavering, until she finished. Then, in the same steady way he had used all along, Ray gently challenged her. He made it clear that impressive numbers were not the only part of the business that mattered. "A place can run on fear and hit sales targets for a while," he said, voice warm but firm. "But if people are forced to check their dignity at the door just to keep working, those results come at too high a cost. That is not how we are going to do things anymore." He paused, letting the message settle into every corner of the quiet showroom. The air felt different, dense with change. The announcement that followed was one nobody expected. Every single management role in the dealership, including Jessica's, would be reviewed, not just by him, but with input from everyone who worked there. It was not about who sold the most or kept the tightest schedule. It would be about who made the place better, safer, and more respectful each day. Ray took a few steps so he could look as many people in the eye as possible. "This is not something that starts and ends up here," he explained, gesturing to where the managers had usually gathered. "This new way of listening, of trusting, of having everyone contribute, is going to run across the whole center. From this point on, being in charge means helping others grow, not holding power over them. Respect will come before routine, and progress will not just be for the few at the top, but for all of us together." The next morning at Rodriguez Auto Center felt different, like the first breath after a storm. The usual routine, rushed coffee in the break room, quick nods in the hallway, took on an unfamiliar edge. Instead of the old, nervous glances, people met each other's eyes and held them just a little longer. There was a new curiosity in the air, mixed with the natural anxiety of not knowing exactly what would come next. Some folks whispered words of encouragement, while others just sat quietly at their desks, waiting to see how things might actually change, now that their daily life had been turned upside down. Tension and hope swirled together, keeping everyone on their toes. Mechanics at their workstations swapped hesitant jokes. The sales team shared quiet conversations about fairness, and even the cleaning crew moved with a lighter step. You could sense unspoken promises to stand up for each other if things got rough. No one was totally sure what would happen to the old order, but for once nobody was worried that speaking up would mean trouble for them. The sense that yesterday's certainties no longer guaranteed anything for tomorrow gave everyone a sense of responsibility, and maybe even a bit of excitement. Upstairs in the glass-walled office, Ray invited Jessica in for a final, honest conversation. He was not looking for payback or trying to rub her face in failure. Instead, he just wanted understanding. He hoped to figure out what led Jessica to believe that so much control and pressure was the only way to lead. Ray poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the table. He let Jessica settle in, watching, as she tried to keep her usual composure. This was no longer her arena of absolute power. Here, she could not hide behind a thick rule book or a sharp tone. Ray asked questions, genuinely listening as Jessica spoke about her past, industry pressures, and the lessons she had picked up over the years. She spoke of difficult bosses, tight deadlines, and a culture where being tough was praised and vulnerability dismissed. Ray did not judge, he just listened. Bit by bit, Jessica admitted she had always feared chaos more than anything, convinced that only strict order could stave off disaster. Ray's silence gave her space, and for the first time, she wondered if there might be another way to lead without clinging to fear. Jessica, stripped of her former power, sat across from Ray with an uncertainty she had not felt in years. Her carefully constructed facade faded away as the conversation unfolded. She admitted, in a way that was almost hard for her to say, that for as long as she could remember, discipline was how she survived in the world. From her earliest days working in auto shops across Texas, she had learned that following protocol and enforcing strict routine could keep chaos at bay. For her, order had always meant safety. It was the only way she knew to hold everything together. She went on, saying she honestly believed that if she kept everyone in line and running according to the numbers, things would work out for the best. She confused rigor with real progress. When people kept their heads down and stayed quiet, she told herself it was a sign of a well-run business. Yet, as Ray gently pressed her about the cost of this style, how it made people feel small, how it shut down creativity and trust, something shifted in her expression. Jessica faltered, her words stumbling as she realized for the first time that all those years spent pushing for results had caused her to lose sight of the people behind them. Silence, she started to understand, was not the same thing as respect. Ray did not raise his voice or gloat. Instead, he just spoke plainly, his tone gentle but certain. He told Jessica that, under the new way things would work at Rodriguez Auto Center, there would be space for people to make mistakes, room to learn, and to start over, but there would not be space for old ways of ruling by fear or keeping people in place just for the sake of authority. He explained that true leadership must be rooted in empathy and understanding, not just cold efficiency. Their conversation ended with a quiet handshake. There was no anger in it, just the acknowledgement of a chapter coming to a close. Jessica understood, maybe for the first time, that her time as manager had run its course. As she stood and left the office, Ray felt a sense of relief. For Rodriguez Auto Center, the space was finally open for new kinds of leaders to step up, ones who would value openness and trust above all else. With Jessica's departure marking the end of one era, Ray knew it was time to name someone to help steer Rodriguez Auto Center into its next phase. He didn't hold a long search or set up intimidating interviews. Instead, he turned to someone everyone respected, but maybe didn't notice as much as they should have. Marcus from Parts had been with the company for more than 15 years. He was the guy who always knew when a coworker needed support, even if it was just covering a late shift or helping track down a rare shipment. He had solved plenty of small problems before they grew into big ones, and he did it all quietly, never drawing attention to himself. When Ray asked Marcus to step into the interim manager role, Marcus hesitated at first. He had never been the type to chase titles, but he knew the difference between authority and leadership. Taking a deep breath and looking around at his colleagues, he agreed. Not out of ambition, but out of a sense of responsibility to the team. Word spread quickly through the dealership. There was no shouting or applause. What washed over the staff was something softer, a tide of quiet gratitude. People nodded to each other in the halls as if saying, maybe this time it'll be different. Lunch that day in the break room felt easier than it had in years. There were still people who watched, uncertain, but you could see conversation flowing in a way it hadn't before. Folks from different departments sat together, talking about their weekend plans and joking gently about the messy cars they had to detail. Someone brought extra cookies and set them out for anyone to grab, and small gestures like that seemed to mean more now. There weren't balloons or banners. Nobody would have called what happened a party, but it was a new kind of moment for Rodriguez Auto Center. Instead of looking for a reason to duck out early or keep their heads down, people exchanged quiet hellos and shared a little more than usual. Even the laughter, while timid, did not sound forced. Trust would still have to be built one day at a time, and nobody expected overnight miracles. Still, hope had crept in, winding its way into side conversations and the relief in people's eyes. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed like something everyone could build together. As the weeks turned into months, you could see real changes settling into life at Rodriguez Auto Center. No one waved a magic wand, but small. And things added up each day. People started greeting each other by name, even if they worked in completely different departments. Marcus, perched behind his desk or walking the shop floor, never stopped checking. Not because it was his job as interim manager, but because it was his habit. Slowly, the company's ways began to reflect something different. Everyday respect, a willingness to truly listen, and new recognition for individuals' ideas and efforts, no matter where they came from. The blue uniforms folks wore, once something that made everyone feel boxed in, didn't matter the way they used to. It no longer mattered if you worked behind the counter, under the hood of a truck, or back in the parts cage. If you had an idea, people listened. Sometimes suggestions came quietly over coffee or in passing at a workstation. They might come from someone new or from someone who had been here half their life. No one had to shout or fight for attention. Something as simple as a look or a quick comment could open the door to a smarter way of doing things. People sat in on meetings who had never been invited before, and work got done faster, not because folks were threatened, but because they wanted to help each other out. That spring, someone suggested a barbecue out in the parking lot on a Saturday. It was nothing fancy, just grills borrowed from home, and a long table covered with grocery store sides. Ray stood up when things quieted down, holding his paper plate and smiling at the mix of faces gathered around. He thanked everyone, pointing out that real change happened in the way people treated one another, not in what was written on their name tags or listed in company memos. Status, he said, mattered a lot less than kindness and real working relationships, the kind you build by showing up, listening, and sticking with each other through rough days. As dusk fell and people started heading home, there in the corner sat the old cleaning bucket, left behind but not forgotten. It reminded everyone where the company had once been, how far things had come. More than any spreadsheet or trophy, what mattered now was leaving behind a heritage built on respect and the simple truth that everyone, no matter their role or uniform, had value and dreams worth sharing.